So let's talk about adoptions. So adoptions is something that we really enjoy around here. Here at our firm, we do a lot of divorces and a lot of custody modifications. There's a lot of fighting and stuff. And especially in the divorce context, ultimately we're dissolving a family relationship. And so for us to be able to work in adoption and put a family together, it's a new beginning. In a lot of ways, a divorce is a new beginning too, but an adoption is a new beginning, and everyone around can look at it and see it as a new beginning. So we don't typically work with adoption agencies. That's not something that we do for the most part. Almost all the adoptions we're going to do are going to be step parent adoptions, or it's a situation where a person, a non-parent, has had possession of the child for a long time, usually by court order, right? So imagine a long-term foster parent, imagine a grandparent who's been raising this child and has a court order granting this person, primary conservatorship. So when we do an adoption, it's almost always the child has already been part of this household, the child has already been part of this family, and now we just need an order that makes it all official. Sometimes if the state is involved, they can kind of complicate things, but we like to make them as simple as we can. And, it really doesn't get much simpler than a step parent adoption, especially when the other bio parent is happy to relinquish their rights for one reason or another. I have been a step parent. So, Holly, my wife, our daughter was 3 when I met Holly. And so, I was her de facto dad, the stepdad for her whole life growing up. And so for us, I was finally able to adopt her as an adult. My stepdaughter is now my official daughter. That was just an amazing day for me. And I know what it's like to be a step parent who's there present in the household with this child, raising this child every, on a day-to-day basis, but you're still a step parent, right? You're that far away from being a full-blown parent. That adoption that changes that relationship legally from being a step parent to being a parent is, and it's a huge milestone. It's one of the, happiest days of my life. And so I completely get what it's like to go through the whole step parent process, but then also to become a parent. Now, legally speaking, there are some requirements about a step parent and how a step parent adopts. And sometimes you'll have a situation where the other bio parent will voluntarily relinquish their rights. And that makes our life a lot easier. It makes the adoption go a lot faster. Sometimes the bio parent won't voluntarily relinquish their rights, and so we have to terminate them. Texas only allows a child to have 2 parents. So if the biological parent won't relinquish and you can't terminate their rights as a parent legally, then an adoption can't take place. Getting that other bio parent to voluntarily relinquish their right to the child, or proving to the court that it's in the child's best interest to sever that parental relationship so that the step parent can adopt, that's where it takes a skilled lawyer. It takes an experienced lawyer to make that happen. The process when you get to court for the adoption, in a step parent adoption or an adoption of an existing person who's had the possession of the child for a while, the process in court is really 2 hearings that usually happen at the same time. So usually there's a hearing to terminate the biological parent or parents. And then once that is done, then the actual adoption process, the hearing for the adoption will take place. And so here in Tarrant County, it's common that the child will be present at the courthouse and the court will hear the part of the hearing where we terminate a parent or parents, and the kid won't be in the courtroom. Once that part of the process is done, then we'll bring the child into the courtroom and we'll get all set up for the judge, and the judge will go ahead and hear the testimony about the adoption, and then the court will go ahead and grant the adoption. And then what they like to do, the judge will let the kids go pick out a stuffed animal, and then everyone will come up to the bench and they'll take pictures to kind of commemorate that day and that moment. It's a happy event for the courts. The judges enjoy it. The court staff will be there clapping, and whoever's in the court will clap at the end. So an adoption is really an awesome thing to be a part of. And as a lawyer, I don't get the benefit of, being part of that family, but it is sure cool to be a part of the process that helped the family have that event on that day and fix their family by adding this child or children. It's just freaking awesome. The biggest challenges in a step parent adoption or an adoption out of foster or something like that, the biggest challenges are typically the biological parent won't voluntarily relinquish. Usually we run into a situation where, the biological parent hasn't been very engaged in the child's life. They haven't taken their visits. They don't have a relationship with the child. They haven't paid their child support. They've never really been there. But when presented with the opportunity to voluntarily relinquish their rights to the child so the child can be adopted by someone who wants to be an engaged parent, the biological parent won't do it. That is a huge challenge. Also, kind of a logistical challenge is the family code requires, in many circumstances, a custody evaluation for the purposes of the divorce. And that custody evaluation can take weeks or months. That's something that can kind of slow down the process. The social study is still part of a lot of adoptions, and that's just kind of a procedural thing that eats up some money and eats up some time and kind of slows down the works. But once you get past that, the adoption itself is pretty quick. As far as any requirements to adopt the child, the custody evaluation needs to recommend the adoption, and there is a background check, a criminal background check on the step parent or the person who is going to become the adoptive parent of the child, and we got to make sure that they're safe to adopt the child. But even that, y'all, just so you know, if you had a DWI back in 2009 and you haven't been in any criminal trouble since then, that's not going to stop this adoption. If you got in trouble, when you were 17 or 18 years old a long time ago and you haven't been in trouble since, that's not going to stop the adoption. If you got picked up for some kind of fraud or some kind of felony in the last year or two, that could be a problem with the adoption, of course. But don't worry about, once I got a speeding ticket, once I got arrested for this or that. If it was all back in the day, for the most part, that's not going to slow down the adoption. There's no income requirement. Like, you don't have to show that you make X amount of dollars to be able to adopt a child. You don't have to show that you have your own car or any of that. The real question is, have you been in the child's life? Are you a positive influence on this child? Are you there in the family and you've been in a spot where you choose to become responsible for this child? That is the real question. As a step parent, if you and your spouse break up, if y'all get a divorce, you lose your spouse and you lose the child, right? Because you don't get a possession schedule for your stepchild in Texas. So you could spend years helping raise this child, and then if you get a divorce, that child is gone. You never see that child again because step parents don't get a possession schedule. Adopting that child, it's as if that child was born to you. It's as if you've been there the entire time. And if there is a divorce in the future, God forbid, then you would get a possession schedule of that child as well as any biological child you have with your spouse. That's the real analysis for the court is, are you the kind of person who's going to love this child and take care of this child as a parent? And if you've been that step parent, you've been there, and you are going through the adoption process, hoping to take on that formal responsibility as a parent, the court wants to do it. Your lawyer just has to make sure that all the paperwork is in place and create that environment where the judge can just say yes. And that's the point.